And hello, everybody. I'm so glad to see our crew in the house for this last installment of our leadership soft skills series. But we will be back. We will be back in another few months. So look out for us with some new stuff. Okay, and as usual, Anita, if you can make it so that folks can unmute themselves
Mhm.
throughout, that would be awesome.
Okay, we can do that. Okay, well, maybe I'll go ahead and get started with the score slides and then we'll see where we are. So again, welcome all of you who have joined us. We're pleased that you came to the session and hope that you'll find it as enjoyable as the previous ones have been. Lots of good information. So I will just briefly go over SCORE again, since you've heard it before. Dolly, if you just give me the next slide. And again, our mission is to foster vibrant small business communities. And we do this through mentoring and education. So we are hoping that you, as a small business owner, get all of the support that you need to be successful. Next slide. Okay, so I'll just let you read that. We have over 10,000 volunteers across the country that we have access to. So if your business is unusual, we're likely to be able to find someone who is in the same business somewhere in the country. So next slide. Okay, we get people from all over. We're pleased that more than half of our entrepreneurs are women and about 10% are veterans. So next slide. I think that's the last. Okay, so that's the last slide. I should just mention to you that the recorded webinars that we had on our website, many of them are no longer there because the recordings have expired. So we're transferring everything to our YouTube channel. And we will gradually be doing that over the next couple of weeks. So instead of going to our website for recorded webinars, you probably want to go to our YouTube channel. So now I'm going to turn this over to Dahlia and Karen, and they're going to talk about who's who in the workplace. So go.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming on tonight. Tonight, we are talking about who is in the workplace, understanding different generations. We're going to cover a few items. We're going to define what a generation is. We're going to identify who they are. We're going to dive into why it's even important for us to understand the generations in the workplace. We're going to really break down generational gaps. I'm sure that's a term that we've either used personally or that we've heard before. We're going to talk about how to bridge it, and then we will have some time at the end for questions. But first, to officially introduce myself, my name is Dahlia. For those of you that have been a part of this series, hello again. For those of you that are just joining us, I am an HR subject matter expert for SCORE. And actually, I was a mentee and I am actually representing SCORE Houston today. I'm actually down here in Texas. So, Karen, I'll pass the mic to you so you can introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, Dahlia. This is Karen Cross Hatton. For those of you that are returning, hello, welcome back. I'm so excited to have you for this last installment. For those of you that are new, welcome, and we hope to see you back with us. I too am a subject matter expert in human resources for SCORE, as well as a mentee. So I'm looking forward to walking through this session with you and hoping that you all will get something great from it.
Awesome. So let's dive in. So first and foremost, what is a generation? Now, I'm a person that loves definitions. So according to Oxford, a generation is all the people born or living about the same time, right? Super simple, really easy to understand. But what are the generations, right? So right now we have a total of 5 generations that are potentially in the workplace. So we have Gen Z, 97 to 2015. We have Generation Y, which is commonly known as the millennials. We have Gen X, we have our baby boomers, and we have our traditionalists. And what's interesting is the names of the generations really kind of give you some insight into who they are, which we're just going to dive into next. If my screen lets me move forward. There we go. So who are these generations? Let's break them down. So first and foremost, we have the traditionalists. Now, the traditionalists are technically considered our seniors, right? They're from 1922 to 1943, and they obviously have their own experience, right? They were raised with strict rules. They have very high expectations, very motivated by job titles and compensation. So, president, director, manager, those actual titles are extremely important to this generation because it kind of defines where they have arrived to in the workplace. And they prefer very formal attitudes and structured work environments. And again, if you think about the time that they were born in, all of this really makes sense, right? Now, their worldview is obedience over individualism. Age equals seniority, and they like to advance through the hierarchy. So they really have a belief system of you can start, quote unquote, at the bottom and work your way up to the top, to the most senior position. And that is the type of climb that traditionally the traditionalists respect. So next on the list, we have our baby boomers, right? So the baby boomers are from 1947 to 1964. So interestingly enough, they're named after the post-World War II spike because of the birth rate. Birth rate really went up. And due to the large numbers, they shaped the culture both philosophically and politically. They're loyal to their jobs to achieve success, right? So that's a key difference is their loyalty comes because of the expected growth that they're going to receive. And really good teachers for relationship building and communication. And obviously, like I said, if you really think about where they were in the time and why they're even called the baby boomers, communication was natural because it was just a lot of people around. So, and their worldview is achievement comes after paying one's dues, so sacrifice for success. So if you think again about where they're coming from as far as life-wise and mentality, they were kind of taught that you're supposed to climb the ladder. So they don't have a problem with paying one dues, and they respect success after they've actually really, really put in the work. And now we have Generation X. So Generation X, again, is 1965 to 1980. Excuse me. Now, this is the MTV generation. So interestingly enough, they were actually named after a book written by Douglas Coupland. Again, they're the MTV generation, and they're also known kind of as the latchkey generation. These were the kids that, for the very first time, parents were really working a lot. And so they had the key around the neck, and they were getting themselves to school and getting themselves home from school by themselves. So obviously, if you're raised like that, you're naturally going to be a little bit more independent. They have more entrepreneurial spirits. And because of that, again, they value autonomy, results versus work hours, and efficiency. So their worldview is they favor diversity. They're quick to move if their employer fails to meet their needs. They're a little resistant to change at work if it affects their personal life. So again, if you think about how they were raised and the environment that they actually were raised in, some of this kind of makes sense and it kind of resonates. Like if I was independent, if I was doing my own thing, and I was the one who was responsible for it and just expected to achieve and be successful at it, then I expect for people that are also in my circle to be able to meet those needs and live up to that same standard. Now, next, we have Generation Y, or the millennials. So again, fun fact, named after a book titled Millennial Rising, and they're actually the oldest, will become or became adults right around the millennium. They are the offspring of the baby boomers, and they're considered the most educated generation in the workplace. They value meaningful work and will definitely challenge the status quo, right? So their worldview is they seek challenge, they like growth and development. They believe that you can have fun at work, you can kind of be yourself. And again, they will leave an organization if they don't change. So once again, if you kind of see the pattern, like the millennials are coming from the baby boomers. So because of that, and if they are coming from a place of communication, you need to do your own thing and you need to be successful. They kind of bucked up against the system a little bit and was like, okay, that's great. We can have fun. I want to be successful, but I also want all of my needs met as well. And last, we have Gen Z, which is 97 to 2015. Now, fun fact again, they're also known as iGen. So this is the first generation that grew up with a smartphone, right? So they're not named because society just kind of still feels like they're finding their identity. With the growing up with smartphones and the internet and so forth, you got to think about it. Everything over the internet is just really put out there. So they value authenticity and transparency, and they carry that over into the workplace. They like social awards. Okay. Now their worldview is they self-identify as the digital device addicts. Like these are the people that you never really see without their phone in their hand or their face being down. They like independence and individuality. Again, they prefer to work with millennial managers. So they prefer to work with managers that kind of have a little bit of the same feeling and understanding and vibe that they do. They're very innovative, and they like new technology. And again, if you think about where they've come from and the experience that they've had, a lot of this really starts to make sense. So why is it even important to know this? Okay. So first and foremost, it addresses the generational gap, which is the difference in behavior, outlook, and expectations between groups of people who were born at distinctly different times. It helps prevent misunderstanding, especially managerial roles, and it helps with communication, i.e. email versus texting. So if we just start with the fact that it addresses a generational gap, one thing, a lot of times the statement there's a generational gap can be used in a little bit of a negative tone, that there's something wrong because person A cannot understand person B or vice versa. And so this addresses that, because what you understand is there's not really a gap. There's just a difference in outlook. There's a difference in experiences. There's a difference in education. There's just a difference. And so it takes away from, let me just focus on the fact that A does not understand B, but let's focus on what's happening with A, what is happening with B, because they're coming from two completely different places, right? Preventing misunderstandings, that kind of folds into that. If we're able to take out just the age and really look at the experience, we can now kind of understand, why is this person, if I roll into the very next bullet point, Why is this person texting me all day long? Or why did you feel like it was appropriate to text your resume or text me to ask me about the status of a job? Well, if they're coming from a world and they were raised in a world where texting was the main source of communication, that's why. It's not that they're unprofessional. And just in vice versa, the person that prefers to email is more than likely coming from a place where email was the main source of communication and they're comfortable with that. So it's not that something is wrong with them or they are not with the times. They're moving in a way that was instilled within them. So multi-general workforce is a path to prosperity. Okay. So work teams that comprise multiple generations perform better than those that do not, right? You're in a situation where you have multiple points of view and you're able to gather those things together to create what it is that you need, okay? An age diverse workforce gives companies more insight into the marketplace. If you're really looking to understand your customer, who's better to help you understand your customer than someone that is just like your customer? And if you have a diverse group in front of you, you're able to approach almost any type of customer because you'll have someone there that is probably able to relate to them on some way, shape, or form. Now, the multi-general force workforce yields a stronger pipeline of talent. People are able to come into your organization and see someone that either looks like them or talks like them or can resonate with the language that they use. And that's important to allow someone to feel at quote unquote at home at their job. The pipeline improves the workforce stability as well as retention of intellectual capital. So again, going back to the previous statement where if you have people in your workforce that are extremely diverse, all of that, all of those thought processes, all of those mental juices are right there. And you will naturally attract other people that are able to think in that type of environment and are willing to share who they are and what they do and why they believe that and why they think, how they think your product or your business can be improved. And a multi-generational workplace does something, I don't know what that boosts the bottom line, boost the bottom line of many organizations based on greater engagement and performance, which is exactly what I just kind of rounded out. So here's a few facts to know. People ages 55 to 64 actually represent 64% of the labor market amongst the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So if you think about who's in your workforce right now, it's saying that essentially 55 to 64 is over half. Over half the people that are still in the workforce right now fall within that range. However, in just 8 years, millennials will start to turn 50, which in some way, shape, or form is a little crazy to think about, especially when we've talked about millennials and who they are, some of the things that they've done that maybe we didn't understand, that they are now approaching their quote unquote, what we may consider to be their senior years, their midlife within the next, I said 7 to 8 years. So before I move forward to talk about the generational gap, I just wanted to pause right here and see if, Karen, you had anything to add, if anybody had any questions. Unfortunately, I can't see the chat or anything right now just because of the screen, but I just wanted to pause right here and not move forward yet.
Well, thank you. No, I don't really have anything to add. I think you did a great job of covering, and giving a good understanding of those traits and things that were, associated with each generation. I don't see anything in the chat right now. However, yeah, I would like to go ahead and open it up to anyone that may have some thoughts. If you had an aha moment at any point while Dahlia was speaking, or if you had some questions about generations in the workplace. You can unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. Okay, looks like we can keep going.
Okay, awesome. So the generational gap, and I just wanted to go to this cartoon because this is a perfect example of what we consider to be the generational gap. You got the teacher asking that general question. You come back to your school your first day, and what did I do on my summer vacation? Now, all depending on where you fall right now or your age on this particular call, kind of determined how you answer that question. I know in my day, it was, like a show and tell, like you brought something to school that showed what you did on your summer vacation. And we all had to go up and kind of do this show and tell about summer vacation. Well, this comic is kind of showing that that has changed. Like we document what we do, our vacations, everything on our Facebook page. Most people aren't printing out pictures anymore and aren't really doing that experience, or that posting is your memoir from your vacation or so forth. So I just thought that that was cute. So let's move to the behavior gap. And I want to apologize. And so for some reason, it seems like when the slides were uploaded, that it seems to have adjusted the, what's the word I'm looking for? The font and things have been moved. So please know that when this is sent out, that will be adjusted and corrected. So I just wanted to apologize for how some of these look, because I don't know what happened. So first we're going to just talk about the behavior gap. And so behavior gap is essentially the way in which one acts or conducts oneself, especially towards others, okay? And in this example, I thought it was important because one of the things that is very different when we were first talking about the difference in generations is the communication, right? Communication is often one of the big things that comes up when we talk about the quote unquote behavior gap. And so a younger person coming from a world that is more transparent, that is putting things out there, it is more acceptable for them, and they are more likely to speak up, out, or against any idea that is presented to them. They don't feel like they have that restraint. That is not the world that they are actually coming from. However, in turn, an older individual, is more likely to take into consideration their role and position within a company prior to speaking up, out, or against an idea. So, we're sitting in a meeting and one person may be wondering, well, I'm just making up a name, why does Charles not speak up? In some way, shape, or form, sometimes people can mistakenly define that as, oh, Charles is not engaged, or, Charles is not committed. When maybe the truth is Charles feels that based on his particular title, this is not his space to speak up in. But also in reverse, Molly will speak up in a moment. And that can be considered as defiance or disrespect when she actually is coming from a place and from a world where her expectation is that you want my opinion. It doesn't matter my title. I have something that I feel is important to say. And so therefore, I'm going to share that with you. As far as the outlook. So the outlook is a person's point of view or just general attitude towards life, okay? So millennials, as it says, do not put the workplace on a pedestal, right? They feel like whoever I am at home, whoever I am on the weekend, I should still be able to be that person at work. That does not have anything to do with my intelligence or my abilities in this workplace, right? Where Generation X, for instance, is extremely focused on how their education would reserve them a spot at the coveted work spot, right? So I've gone to school, I have a master's, so therefore that means I should be placed at this particular level within this organization. Whereas a millennial may think, difference does it matter if I actually went to school or if I even have these degrees? I have the ability to do the job. I have the intelligence to do the job. That is what we should be focusing on. So again, there's a difference in expectation. And so again, sometimes that difference can be misconstrued. One person can say, well, they're proud, or maybe they think more highly of themselves than they ought. When from the millennial perspective, I'm just confident and I know that I'm intelligent. Or on the other hand, the millennial may potentially be frustrated at the other generation, because why are you promoting that you have a degree so much? What does that have anything to do with it? When, again, for Generation X, that degree is equaling their ability to do what it is that they want to do. The expectations, right? A strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. So, for instance, millennials and Gen X, work is a means to an end. It's extremely transactional. Like, I come to work, therefore I get paid. I want to be challenged, but I also want flexibility. And most important, I expect to be developed, right? So, what I expect is that this relationship is not one sided. I don't view coming to work as me putting it on a pedestal. It is a job. It is someplace that I go. And because I wake up and I come here every day, I therefore should get a paycheck in return. Oh, and by the way, while I'm here, your job is also to make sure that if I ever decide to leave, that I'm a better employee when I walk out than when I arrived. Okay. Baby boomers and traditionalists, on the other hand, are looking for a career. They're thinking more long term. They like defined policies and expectations, and they're looking for some place that they can plant their feet, right? They don't want a lot of movement. They literally want to come to a job, like the job, invest in the job, have the job invest in them, and that be it. Very, very simple. Now, communication is also a big one, which is the exchanging of information or news. And so I've kind of broken down a little bit of the difference in communication amongst the generation. So, for instance, traditionalists, they had rotary phones, memos, and face-to-face. So because of that, those were all one-on-one interactions, right? Very discreet, very professional, very respectful, right? They approached each other with titles, Mr., Mrs., Sir, Miss. Things were organized. And there was definitely a hierarchy to that. Well, baby boomers kind of evolved to touch tone phones. So a little bit quicker, call me anytime. You can connect with me on a first name basis. So again, as the world evolved into a more efficient, quote unquote, society, so did the generations, right? So now Generation X, we're cell phones and emails, limited accessibility, i.e. only call me at work, otherwise send me an email, right? We like the efficiency. This meeting doesn't have to be 20 minutes. Just you could have told me that in an email, right? Like that's a Gen X statement, because when that email came across, it allowed us to focus our time on other things. So we did not necessarily have to have the phone call. You can express yourself in writing to me and I'll get to it when I get to it. And then we have the millennials. So again, their internet, social media, everything is out there in the open, right? So open communication. You can be polite, but address me as I request. And so, as we move into the society where of her and hers and his and they, this is starting to be a product of that, where we're starting to recognize that people are opting to be addressed as they see fit. So things are very lighthearted, like they like funny emails. Again, address me as who I am as a person, not necessarily my title, which is completely opposite from the traditionalist. And how to bridge the gap. And again, before we dive into that, I will just take a moment and pause and see if there was any statements, or Karen, if you had anything to add.
No, you are doing fine. You're cooking with gas, so you go right ahead.
Okay.
And I don't see anything in the chat at this point.
Okay. So how to bridge this gap, right? Is it even possible to bridge the gap? Well, yes, it is. So the very first thing that you must do is intentionally create a diverse environment, right? And the key word to that is intentional. It does not just happen on its own, okay? Embracing and implementing diversity initiatives in your recruitment process has been statistically proven to be beneficial. And it's key to understand that, because you have to take your process and what it is, your goals, and apply them all the way to the start all the way to the start. Like you cannot create a diverse environment after everyone is there and then try to implement diversity. It must start at the root, at the very, very, very beginning of the process, which is I need to be intentional about who I'm even deciding to bring into my organization. Okay. And here's a couple of statistics. Diverse companies are 70% more likely to capture new market. Why? Because more than likely there's someone on your team that can relate to that market. Diverse teams are 87% better at making decisions, more thought process, more juices flowing. Diverse management teams lead to a 19% higher revenue. Why is that? Because your management team is more than likely understands how to work with people. And if they do not, there's someone on their team that they can use as a resource to guide them. Okay. Companies identified as more diverse and inclusive are 35% more likely to outperform their competitors. That's a key percentage right there. Inclusive companies get 2.3 times more cash flow per employee. So diversity is not just, okay, I just need to have it to check a box. When you think about the success of your company, the financial bottom line of your company, the betterment of your company, diversity just equals that. It just speaks to that in its totality. So the next is to just foster a work environment that respects and values differences. So be sensitive to various work styles and communicate through different channels. So again, when we went back to having a diverse management team, if you have a diverse management team, more than likely you're going to have different people on your team that work differently, that think differently, that process differently. So if you have that, again, it allows you to be a little bit more transparent and recognize those differences when it comes to your staff. And just as it said, communicating through different channels. When we talked about paper or email versus texting, paper, versus a one-on-one. It's nothing wrong with creating an environment that has all of those, that not only has a newsletter, but has an email blast that can, a hard copy newsletter, but also an email blast that can go out. If you have a situation where people are signing up for shifts, what's wrong with having a text blast go out? Like, it's possible to create all of these different channels up under one umbrella. Recruitment and retention strategy should establish across a variety of channels. As I said earlier, it needs to start at the very, 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 very beginning. So it's not just who comes into the company. If you're being intentional, it's where are you also going to find the people that you feel like you need for your company to be as diverse as it can possibly be to get you to where your company wants to be. Offer a range of benefit choices to meet your employees where they're at. As we grow as people, if you think about your own personal life, the toys that you played with when you were 5 were not probably not the same things that you indulged in when you were 15 or when you were 25. You grew, you evolved, your needs changed, your environment changed, your desires changed. And so therefore you needed everything around you to fit that. And it does not change just because we're talking about a workplace. Your employees that you met, the person that you hired on day one, 365 days later, they're potentially in a completely different situation, right? Maybe they got married, maybe they had a child, maybe they picked up a second job, maybe they're back in school. These are all conversations that should be happening with the management team that allows that information to flow into the main source so that what type of benefits do we need? How many employees do we have that are potentially having children or possibly thinking about having children? How many employees do we have that are hitting a certain age and may require different types of subsidy insurance? It's all in those communications. Utilize traditionalists in your training for younger generations. One of the hardest things right now is that as the traditionalists begin to exit the workplace and the workplace changes to be more digital, a lot of times those traditionalists can kind of get left out. But regardless of how digital the workplace gets, there's still nothing that will ever take the place of one-on-one communication and contact. And so when you're trying to think about different ways that you can keep them involved and keep them invested, that is one way to do it. It also helps to break down the communication barrier, because if you're bringing a traditionalist in with maybe someone from a younger generation, and those two have to talk, those two have to communicate and really talk about the ultimate goals of the organization, you've now put them in a situation where they're able to hear and receive from one another in a way that maybe they were not able to before. Involve the older generation in the training of diversity initiatives. Again, kind of the same thing. The younger generation now is more diverse accepting, right? They've grown up in a world where all types of races, cultures, creeds, sexual orientations, etc., are out there. And so because of that, they're naturally more embracing of it. Whereas maybe someone from the older generation that saw things differently may not quite understand. So you're bringing them in not only to learn from the younger generation and what you're teaching, but also, again, for that younger generation to understand where that traditionalist has come from, what they're accustomed to and what they're used to, so that maybe you break down the lack of understanding that occurs between the two of them, and they can see each other at least on an even playing field. Always be open to change, right? Now, this to me is one of the hardest ones, okay? Mainly because in order to do everything that we've talked about thus far, you have to be open to change, right? And so recognize that as your workforce grows, that the needs of your employees will change. Embrace those changes. So just as I was saying that our needs change from 5 to 15 to 25 to 55, that's the same thing that's happening in your workplace. And it's much easier to just embrace those changes than fight them, okay? Creating a consistent line of communication so you're always aware of where your employees are. So again, kind of reiterating the same thing, having that line of communication, having expectation, if you're a multi-tiered organization, having that expectation of your managers, like, are you talking to your employees? Tell me what's going on. Knowing people by their first name, knowing people not only just by that once a year performance review, but outside of that, and putting people in a place where they are comfortable. And then once they're comfortable, they will naturally begin to share with you who they are and what they need, which allows you to continue to mold and shape your business, or help with recommendations of how to shape a company that you're a part of. So I am a lover of quotes, and I just thought that this was so powerful because it speaks directly to what this actually kind of wraps up this whole 5-part series. But for this particular one, leaders who fail to embrace, manage, and develop cohesive teams that thrive and succeed across generational differences will soon succumb to constant conflicts, silos, separatism, low morale, stagnant performance, and inconsistent productivity. Now, what's interesting about this statement is that we've actually taken all of those different adjectives and said, we're now going to call it quiet quitting. So when you actually think about today's quiet quitting, you can apply all of these to that. They're quiet quitting, their performance is now stagnant, their productivity is inconsistent, they have low morale, and that's why they're quiet quitting. They've kind of separated themselves from the team, so they're no longer really giving advice and feedback, or they're having conflict with their manager, or they're just doing enough to get by. So even though we've given it this really nice term right now, what it really all boils down to is everything that I just kind of went through in these previous slides. So here's just a few takeaways, okay? There are 5 generations in the workplace. The importance of embracing these generations where they are. It's extremely important. Again, it's much easier to embrace than it is to challenge it, because it's never going to change. There's a generation now after this generation, and the generations will continue to evolve. And as they continue to evolve, so will their experiences. And so that means that it's also important to acclimate your environment to not only the current generations that are there, but be open to change, to embracing the generations that are still yet to come. So here's a few next steps. For some of you, you're like, I never even thought about all the generations in the workplace and what difference it would make. So I would just encourage you to take this back and just observe. Just go back to work, go back to your business, and just observe. Who is here? You know, what types of things am I seeing in this space? You know, do I have more of a younger crowd in my workplace? Do I have more of an older crowd? Is my crowd kind of diverse? You know, really just take a step back and take a really good look. And then once you do that, open up the lines of communication. Find out where people are. Do people actually feel like they're being utilized and invested in your organization according to where they are, right? And then once you have that answer, create a plan. Now, the key that I want to say to that is, don't go into your office with your senior leadership team and just create a plan and come out and say, hey, I spoke to all 12 of you. I now have a plan on how to fix this. No, when you go to create a plan, you actually go backwards. You then go back to those people, those individuals, those groups, and you open up the lines of communication again. Hey, I'm noticing that our traditionalists in this environment are not really being utilized. Go talk to the traditionalists. What are some things that you feel like you're missing in this workplace? What are some areas that you feel like we could do better? Take their advice, take their input, your actual plan, and use that as to plant the seed. Use that to develop what it is that you need. Keep them involved in it. Otherwise, our vision, when we're not that other person, is always going to be limited. It's just human nature. I'll never know what it's like to look through the eyes of my 22-year-old daughter, even though it's my daughter. She has a completely different experience. So for me to create what her experience should be off of my perception of what she should feel is never fair. And so you don't want to then go back and injure what it is that you're trying to do. Okay, so observe, open up the lines of communication, decide if whether or not you need to create a plan. And at the time that you're creating that plan, go back and talk to them to include them in that plan. Observe what has happened, go back and open up the lines of communication again. How does this feel? How are you guys liking this? What is the workplace looking like? Go back to determining if you need to create a plan. So this three-step plan is cyclical. You just continue to do it. You continue to move around in that area, and it really never stops. You will never find yourself like, okay, I've created a plan and I am all good. No, it never stops. It's always consistent. So I'm going to pause there. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free.
Okay, I see nothing in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised. But because this is our last evening together, and this is, one of the last topics that we'll be covering, we do want to hear from you. What has been your experiences with either if you're an employer of folks, what does it look like for you with your generations in the workplace? And if you are an employee, I'm sure that you encounter various generations in the workplace, and how do you deal with that? So, if anybody'd like to come off mute or drop a comment in the chat, we'd love to hear from you.
Good evening, everybody.
Hey, Rod, how are you?
I'm good. How y'all doing today?
Excellent, my friend. Excellent.
We're good, thanks.
My experience has been pretty much everything you have been sharing on has been like dead on for me. I try to always include people. I often like to tell people who work for me that as a manager, my job is not so much as just bossing you around, but is actually in setting you up for success. So I need to know, what do you need? How, and I found that when I'm talking to that 25-year-old, it's way different than when I'm talking to that 55-year-old.
Mhm.
You know, a 25-year-old will shoot me a text and you're standing right next to me.
Yep.
And
In a
the
heartbeat.
55-year-old will be like, I didn't read my email. Even myself, I'm 61. I had to actually learn how to check emails every day, 2, 3 times a day. How to, because it's like, why do I want to do that? But it's like, if you don't want to fall behind, and if I want to build a legacy, so 100 years from now, I still want a more excellent way to live, to be functioning. In order for that to happen, we got to be able to successfully pass things off to each other. And I think the easiest part of this for me is, I look at it as respect. Every level. It's nobody's disrespecting me if you're, if we're talking and you're shooting me a text. That's not a disrespect because you didn't come to the office. But just being able to really meet people where they are, and then begin to develop that interest in them, looking at them when I'm asking you, so what makes your job easier? What do you think about the place? What can we add? Because as a behavioral health service, it is really important for me to create a family-oriented, friendly, safe space for people to come to, so that that client, when you need to fall apart, you feel safe. And I can't do that with the staff that's bickering, fighting each other. We don't, that's not tolerated. We don't do that. If we got an issue, let's talk about it. But I've found definitely I've had people work for me that's 18 all the way up to 71. And you can see all those different personalities, even in a meeting. So thank you. I just wanted to put that in.
Thanks, Rod. And as always, you add great value and depth to the conversation. And I think that, as we are talking about generations in the workplace, the other thing that we are not really going to take a deep dive in tonight, but that is also relevant, is now we are talking about inclusivity, and we're talking about gender, right? And we're talking about folks' pronouns and their preferred names and all of those things that when we were just in the workplace with the traditionalists or the baby boomers or even Gen X, wasn't really a large conversation. But today, with you have your Gen X, your millennials, your Gen Zs, it's becoming a thing. And with the changes in laws and the political climate, there's so much to think about, because it's not just generations, but some of the generations come with some of these other sensitive areas and issues that you also have to be mindful of. When you think about having the gender issues with the bathrooms, and when you think about having spaces for nursing mothers, and when you think about having spaces that are designated and designed for particular prayer times or whatever, like there's a lot to think about and a lot of changes that are happening just in our world. And all of those things also become a part of what's going on in the workplace and how you manage those things. And Arian said she agreed with Rod and what Rod was saying. So thank you, Arian. Is there anybody else that has a comment or a thought, or are dealing with something in the workplace that you feel could be generational, and just want to kind of talk about it or put it out there? Anybody? No? Okay, quiet group. Well, Dahlia, I feel like, hey, we have a whole hour and a few minutes we can give back to people of their lives if if we are done here, right? And there's nothing else to say. I'm pretty much done for tonight.
Absolutely. I also am done for tonight unless anyone has any additional questions or anything. But thank you all for being here, and I hope that the information was useful to you.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think it was a wonderful session. Thank you so much. I thought actually some of your statistics were pretty eye-opening
Mm.
and very useful. So I hope people will take them to heart.
Yeah,
And,
and stay tuned as we continue to build this series out and come up with some new topics and things to talk about and enjoy. Well, thank you, Simone. Thank you, Lisa. Oh gosh, thank you, Arian. I appreciate all you guys for coming and sticking the series out with us. And we definitely are looking forward to any feedback that you may have. If there are topics that we haven't covered here that you feel like you would like to hear a little bit more about, please send that information our way so that we can be sure that we start building out based on what you need and not just what we think we want to give you. Right?
that's
Because we
right. Well,
definitely
we will
yes,
be sending out a survey, so
yes,
that feedback would be very valuable.
yes, indeed. Thank you, Anita.
I want to
Okay.
tell you, ladies, thank you. You have done a wonderful job. You're very informative and have helped me a lot. So thank
Thank
you
you,
very much.
Rod.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rod.
So make sure you refer us to your friends when you guys are thinking about workshops and folks that you think may need to hear it. You may want to invite some of your supervisors or employees, make it a good watch session as we continue to develop content and information that we hope that everyone can find helpful and useful as you go on in your journeys.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you again. Thank you all for coming and have the wonderful rest of your evening.